Commander Vex'thol stood in the observation gallery of the tertiary learning complex, his 3 optical organs focusing intently on the demonstration chamber below. The metallic sheen of his exoskeleton reflected the soft bioluminescent lights as he watched the Terran delegation arrange their equipment on the examination platform. His mandibles clicked together in what could only be described as nervous anticipation. After 3 centuries of studying human military protocols, this was the moment that would either validate or completely obliterate his entire research thesis. The human instructor was tall, even by Terran standards. His designation was Marcus Holloway, and he carried himself with the kind of casual confidence that made Vex'thol's neurological centers fire in rapid succession. The name had taken Vex'thol weeks to properly pronounce without accidentally clicking it into something obscene in his native tongue. "All right, everyone gather around," Marcus called out, his voice somehow both loud and precisely modulated. Vex'thol had learned that humans possessed an almost supernatural ability to project sound with exactly the right amount of force. Not too aggressive, not too submissive, just right, infuriatingly right. Standing beside Holloway were 5 other humans, each one radiating that peculiar combination of absolute competence and what appeared to be barely suppressed amusement. Be sexist. Vex'thol had noticed this before. Humans seem to find humor in virtually everything, including situations that should logically produce only terror or despair. The object at the center of the chamber was the source of tremendous excitement among the Coalition's military theorists. A complete suit of Precursor armor, actual functioning armor from the civilization that had mysteriously vanished approximately 50,000 cycles ago. The Precursors had been the apex predators of their era, their technology so advanced that even fragments of it were considered priceless beyond calculation. This particular suit had been recovered from a deep archaeological site on one of the outer colonies. It was a masterpiece of engineering. The plating appeared to be composed of a metallic composite that had been enhanced with technology that modern Coalition scientists could only partially understand. Drones had examined it, specialist teams had analyzed it, and 3 independent research institutes had submitted papers on its theoretical capabilities. Now Marcus Holloway was going to explain it. "This," Marcus said, running his hand along the chest plate with the kind of intimacy that made several Krell observers in the gallery emit distressed clicking sounds, "is what the Precursors called Adaptive Combat Exoskeleton Mark 7.3. We recovered the historical database files along with the physical suit, which is actually pretty unusual. Most species don't leave instruction manuals with their technological relics." Vex'thol felt his duplicate hearts accelerate. The historical database files. This detail alone was revolutionary. No one had known such files existed until this moment. "The design philosophy is fascinating," Marcus continued, clearly warming to his subject. His eyes moved across the assembled observers in the gallery with the tactical precision of someone doing a security sweep. "See, the Precursors understood something that took most other species thousands of years to figure out. The best armor isn't about being the thickest, it's about being the smartest." He pointed to different sections of the suit with evident pride. "The composite here redistributes kinetic force along 3-dimensional vectors. Instead of absorbing impact all at one point, the material actually channels the force away from vital organs and joints. The Precursors called it harmonic dispersal. Pretty elegant, right?" One of the Krell researchers, a younger specimen named Skevin, raised his primary appendage with a tremor visible even from the gallery. "The power requirements must be extraordinary," he ventured. "Material that performs such active manipulation would require constant energy sustenance." Marcus grinned, that grin again. Vex'thol had come to recognize it as the expression humans adopted right before they said something that would shift an entire conversation sideways. "That's where it gets really interesting," Marcus said. "The suit doesn't require constant external power. See these nodes along the shoulder joint? The Precursors developed a metabolic resonance system. The wearer's own biological energy production powers the armor through sympathetic harmonic frequencies. The more active the wearer is, the more power the suit generates. Clever, right?" Vex'thol felt his sensory organs focus with laser-like intensity. This was revolutionary. This changed everything about energy infrastructure in combat situations. "Wait, another human said, stepping forward. Her designation was Dr. Elena Vasquez, and she was Marcus's second-in-command on this expedition. We should show them the ventilation system. That's the part that really demonstrates the difference between precursor thinking and modern combat engineering. Marcus's grin somehow became even wider. Right. Yeah, that's actually the best part. The most important part, really. He gestured to the side panels of the suit. The precursors understood something fundamental. You can have the most technologically advanced armor in the known universe, but if the person inside it can't breathe properly, sweats themselves into dehydration, or has their core body temperature reach lethal levels, then all that fancy engineering is just an expensive coffin. One of the rough observers, a species known for their logical assessment capabilities, clicked their facial appendages in acknowledgement. This was basic physics. Obviously, the precursors understood thermal management. But here's the thing that made them different, Marcus said, and his tone shifted. It became something almost reverential, the way soldiers spoke when discussing legendary battles or mythical warriors. They didn't just implement passive ventilation, they designed an entire microcirculation system that worked in conjunction with the adaptive plating. The armor actively cooled the wearer in hot environments and retained heat in cold ones. The wearer could operate in extreme temperature ranges that would kill an unarmored human in minutes. Elena stepped forward and touched a specific section of the lower back plating. There are 376 individual ventilation ports distributed across the suit. Each one can adjust independently based on real-time biometric feedback from the wearer's body temperature, heart rate and exertion level. The suit literally adapts to keep the wearer in the optimal physiological state for peak performance. Vex'thol felt something shift in his understanding. He had always understood human survivability through the lens of their aggressive biology, their surprising physical strength, their strange pain tolerance, but this suggested the precursors had understood something about the relationship between comfort and combat effectiveness that most modern militaries had never even theorized. Marcus walked over to the helmet section and pointed to the optical array. Thermal regulation also applies to sensory systems. The helmet can cycle through various light spectrums without the visor fogging up or losing visual clarity. The wearer maintains optimal optical functionality regardless of external conditions or internal temperature fluctuations. This is extraordinary, Skaden breathed from the gallery. The precursors must have had casualties rates far below any documented civilization. Marcus turned, and his expression became something that Vex'thol had come to recognize as the human approximation of profound sadness mixed with quiet pride. The precursors didn't disappear because their armor wasn't good enough, Marcus said softly. They disappeared because they understood warfare in a way that made them impossible to defeat through military means. They vanished because they chose to. The historical records suggest they simply left, moved on to something else. Some theories suggest they achieved a level of technological development that allowed them to transcend physical limitation entirely. The gallery fell silent, and that, Marcus continued, gesturing broadly at the suit, is why we brought this here, to show you that before the precursors left, they left us a gift, not just the physical artifact, but proof that there's another way to think about warfare. Not about making soldiers more aggressive, about making soldiers more capable, more resilient, more thoughtful. Vex'thol felt his secondary optical organs tracking the human with extraordinary precision. The briefing documents had listed Marcus Holloway as a military consultant. They had not mentioned that he was a philosopher as well. Now, Marcus said, and the familiar grin returned, here's where it gets funny. Everyone in the gallery leaned forward simultaneously. When Marcus Holloway said something was funny, other species had learned to pay attention. I'm going to put on this suit, Marcus announced. This 15,000-cycle-old piece of precursor engineering. I'm going to activate it, and I'm going to demonstrate the full functionality in a combat simulation scenario. Because that's what we do. We Terrans, we don't just study ancient civilizations. We wear their armor and actually use it. A Vrel observer, distinguished by his particularly large cranial ridge, actually stood up from his observation seat. That is reckless beyond categorization. The armor has not been tested. The power systems might fail. The kinetic dispersal could malfunction catastrophically. Marcus was already removing his outer garments with the kind of casual efficiency that suggested he had done this exact thing multiple times before. He moved through the chamber with absolute confidence, completely unfazed by the chorus of alarm emanating from the gallery. "Oh, I've tested it," Marcus called out while stripping down to a minimal undersuit. "Extensively. Elena here has run about 2,000 simulations. The suit is solid, well maintained. Precursor engineering might be old, but it's also robust enough to survive 50,000 years without degrading." Elena was already beginning to attach the armor pieces to Marcus's frame. She moved with the choreographed precision of someone who had done this countless times. Each segment locked into place with a satisfying mechanical click. Vex'thol watched the transformation with something approaching awe. The human began to look less like a bipedal biological organism, and more like some kind of armored predator. The suit molded to Marcus's frame with unsettling intimacy. "The interesting thing about this suit," Elena said as she worked, "is that it's actually quite comfortable once you're in it." The Precursors understood something modern militaries often forget. If you want your soldiers to perform optimally, you can't make them miserable. Physical comfort directly correlates to mental acuity. Better ventilation means better breathing. Better breathing means better oxygen delivery to the brain. Better oxygen delivery means better decision-making in combat. "You're suggesting," Skith then called from the gallery, "that comfort is a tactical advantage." "I'm not suggesting," Marcus said as the helmet piece settled over his head. "I'm stating it as fact. Also, dude, you should feel this. My climate regulation is currently set to 20.5 degrees Celsius. I could take a nap right now." The suit powered up with a soft humming sound that Vex'thol's sensory organs registered as almost musical. The plating shifted slightly, settling into optimal configuration. "All right," Marcus said, his voice now coming through a translation module built into the suit. "Running full diagnostics, checking adaptive plating responsiveness, testing kinetic dispersal algorithms, activating harmonic resonance power generation." The suit seemed to come alive. The metallic composite caught the light differently, the surface rippling with barely visible energy fluctuations. "Full systems nominal," Marcus reported. "Power at 97% capacity. All environmental controls functioning at design parameters. Thermal management holding steady. Ventilation operating at maximum efficiency. And honestly, I'm running at approximately 30% cognitive capacity here, because most of my brain is just processing how comfortable this is." From the gallery, Vex'thol heard what could only be described as disbelieving silence. "You understand," Dr. Vasquez said, her voice carrying that particular tone of fond exasperation that humans reserved for expressing affection toward individuals they considered mildly stubborn. "That we brought this to demonstrate combat effectiveness, not comfort parameters." But that's the thing," Marcus responded, moving his armored form with surprising fluidity. "Combat effectiveness starts with comfort. The Precursors knew this. I know this. Most modern military theorists don't know this, which is why they keep designing armor that makes soldiers so miserable they start making tactical errors just to take it off." He turned toward the gallery, and Vex'thol felt a surge of something that he recognized after careful analysis as anticipation. "Now," Marcus said, "you want to see something really impressive? You want to understand why the Precursors were unstoppable? Watch what happens when I activate the advanced combat protocols." The suit shifted. The aesthetic changed from defensive posture to something far more aggressive. The plating configuration altered, optimizing for offensive engagement. The joints became more pronounced, ready for explosive movement. "Running combat scenario, Alpha 9, Elena called out, initiating parameters on a distant console. Engaging simulated opposition. Difficulty level extreme." The chamber illuminated with holographic enemies, 12 of them, all armed with modern coalition weapons, all programmed with elite-level tactical protocols. Marcus didn't move. "You're not going to activate the mobility protocols?" one of the Krell observers asked, confusion evident even in their translated speech patterns. "Watch," Marcus said simply. The holographic enemies advanced, weapons raised, targeting solutions locked. Marcus moved, not in the way any of the observers expected. He didn't activate hover systems or enhanced mobility. Instead, he simply moved. The adaptive plating responded to each micro-movement, redistributing force, preparing for impact, preemptively managing the kinetic load that combat would generate. It was efficiency in motion. It was combat awareness translated into physical form. The first holographic projectile struck him. The harmonic dispersal system activated, channeling the energy away from vital systems. Marcus didn't even register pain. He continued forward, each step measured and purposeful. By the time he reached the first holographic opponent, he had already analyzed their attack patterns, predicted their next 3 movements, and identified 3 distinct vulnerability zones in their combat stance. What followed was a demonstration that Vex'thol would later describe to his research team as the moment he understood why Terrans were not to be trifled with. The Precursor armor wasn't just protective, it was amplifying. It was a conversation between warrior and technology, each element responding to the other. Marcus's human combat instincts, something that had evolved over millions of years of survival on a death world, merged with the Precursor engineering. The combination was something more than the sum of its parts. Within minutes, all 12 holographic opponents were neutralized. Silence filled the chamber. Marcus stood absolutely still, the armor's environmental systems cycling quietly. His breathing, audible through the translation module, was controlled, measured, and barely elevated. "Ah," Marcus said, and Vex'thol heard something in his tone that suggested profound satisfaction.
"Yeah.
That's what I'm talking about. Precursor armor plus human tactical awareness equals something special." Helena laughed from her console. It was a sound of genuine delight, untainted by any irony. "So," Marcus said, turning back toward the gallery, "you want to know the real secret to Precursor dominance?" Vex'thol waited. The answer mattered. It changed everything about how the coalition would approach future military development. "The real secret," Marcus said slowly, with the theatrical timing of someone who had rehearsed this exact moment, "is that they understood something the rest of you are still trying to figure out. They knew that comfort and combat effectiveness aren't opposed. They're partners. You can't push a warrior to peak performance when they're miserable. The Precursors optimized everything, including the experience of being armored in battle." He paused, and Vex'thol could almost see the grin forming beneath the helmet. "Their armor breathed," Marcus said. "And mine has better ventilation." The revelation hung in the observation gallery like a physical force. Vex'thol felt his 3 optical organs processing the implications simultaneously, each one analyzing different aspects of what they had just witnessed. The Precursor armor wasn't a technological anomaly, it was a philosophy made manifest, a statement about how civilization should treat those who protected it. Commander Vex'thol descended from the gallery with considerably more haste than his rank typically permitted. The other observers parted before him, recognizing the urgency in his movement patterns. He reached the chamber floor just as Marcus was beginning to disassemble the suit with Elena's assistance. "Instructor Holloway," Vex'thol said, his translator rendering his thoughts into the precise vocal patterns that humans found most comprehensible, "I must request additional documentation. The implications of what you have demonstrated extend far beyond military application. This represents a fundamental shift in how we understand the relationship between warrior comfort and combat effectiveness." Marcus paused mid-removal of the right arm plate. He turned to face the commander with that expression again, the one that suggested he was simultaneously finding something amusing and treating it with utmost seriousness. "You know what kills more soldiers than enemy weapons?" Marcus asked, not bothering with preliminary pleasantries. Vex'thol had learned this was typical of humans. They often skipped the elaborate courtesy structures that most civilized species considered necessary. "Hostile environmental factors." Vex'thol ventured. "System failures, psychological stress induced by prolonged combat exposure." "All of those," Marcus agreed, "but more fundamentally, it's decision fatigue. When a warrior is uncomfortable, Their cognitive load increases exponentially. They're thinking about their discomfort instead of thinking about tactical options. They're focused on the burning sensation in their feet instead of analyzing enemy movement patterns. They're mentally exhausted by physical misery before they ever encounter actual combat. Alina nodded along, removing the helmet piece with practiced care. Marcus's face emerged, slightly flushed, but completely alert. The Precursors solved this approximately 170,000 years before they disappeared. Elena continued. They created armor that didn't just protect the body, it protected the mind by removing all the unnecessary physical stressors. When you're not struggling against your own equipment, you can focus entirely on survival and mission objectives. Ska then had also descended from the gallery, his larger frame moving with deliberate slowness. The Krail species typically required more consideration with spatial navigation, their additional limbs creating complex movement patterns. I must acknowledge a logical inconsistency in my earlier analysis, Isiden said, his voice carrying the particular tone that Krell used when they were intellectually uncomfortable. I assumed the Precursors disappeared due to technological advancement or resource limitation, but based on this information, it appears they possessed not merely superior technology, but superior understanding of biological optimization. Why would such a civilization simply abandon the physical universe? That's the question that keeps me up at night, Marcus said, removing the undersuit and revealing the pale skin beneath. To non-human observers, human skin appeared almost vulnerable, almost defenseless. Vex'thol had read the analysis documents. Human skin was actually quite remarkable. It was incredibly adaptive, capable of regulating temperature through perspiration, capable of healing surprisingly quickly from minor trauma, capable of sensing environmental conditions with extraordinary precision. Perhaps that was why the Precursor armor worked so effectively with human physiology. It had been designed by beings who understood that the biological organism wearing the armor was equally important as the technological systems protecting it. The historical database files, Marcus said, moving toward a command interface and accessing the recovered information, contains something most archaeological teams overlook. The Precursors kept detailed records about their own civilization, including psychological evaluations. He activated a holographic display. Charts and diagrams emerged, rendering thousands of years of Precursor history into visual format. Their society began experiencing what they called technological stagnation syndrome, approximately 5,000 years before they vanished. Marcus explained, pointing to declining metrics on the display. Innovation rates dropped, artistic output decreased, reproduction rates declined, every indicator of civilization health degraded systematically. This suggests resource limitation or environmental crisis, one of the Wrath observers called from the gallery. Predictable civilizational collapse patterns. Except they didn't collapse, Elena interjected. That's the interesting part. They just stopped. They reached a conclusion. Their historical records contain what amounts to a species-wide referendum. They voted. They decided to pursue something different. Marcus looked directly at Vex'thol, and the commander felt his neural processes accelerate with sudden understanding. They didn't want to keep building bigger weapons, Marcus said quietly. They didn't want to keep optimizing armor. They didn't want to keep playing the same game that every other civilization plays. So they packed up their best technology. They left instructions for species that came after them, and they moved on to something we can't even conceptualize from our current developmental stage. But the armor remains, Vex'thol said slowly, watching the implication unfold across his consciousness like a blooming flower. They left it deliberately. They left it because they wanted future civilizations to understand something crucial. Exactly, Marcus confirmed. They wanted to show that there was another path, not endless escalation, not infinite competition, but optimization toward a specific goal. They achieved perfect military technology, and then they used that achievement to ask themselves a different question. Not how do we win more effectively, but rather why are we still trying to win at all? The observation gallery fell into profound silence. This is philosophically destabilizing, Skandan admitted, a sound of genuine intellectual distress in his translated speech. The precursors are suggesting that military optimization leads inevitably to questioning the necessity of military conflict itself. More than suggesting, Elena said, demonstrating. They proved it. They became so good at warfare that they transcended it. Marcus walked over to the precursor suit, now partially disassembled, and ran his hand across the exposed mechanisms. His expression carried something approaching reverence. Here's what I find most remarkable, he said softly, and this is something I'm only sharing with observers of sufficient clearance. The suit isn't just optimized for human physiology, it's optimized for multiple species. We've run analysis. The adaptive systems can reconfigure for Krell biology, for Vrath physiology, even for the silicon-based consciousness matrices that some of the younger species are developing. Vex'thol felt his sensory organs lock onto this new information with crystalline focus. That's impossible, a Vrath observer stated flatly. Biological systems vary too dramatically. Thermal regulation for a human is completely different from thermal regulation for a Krell, which is why the suit adjusts, Marcus said, gesturing to the internal mechanisms. The harmonic resonance power system doesn't depend on specific biological energy production. It's universal. It works with any living organism that produces measurable thermal or kinetic energy. The ventilation system can adjust port size, placement, and function based on what species is wearing it. The adaptive plating can reconfigure for different skeletal structures and muscle attachment points. It is a suit designed for any warrior, Vex'thol whispered, suddenly comprehending the deeper implication. The precursors weren't just optimizing for human survival. They were creating something universal, something that transcends species limitation. Now you're getting it, Marcus said, and his grin had shifted into something more complex. Something that suggested he was watching a formerly skeptical observer arrive at a profound realization. But why? One of the younger observers called from the gallery. Why would the precursors create technology designed for species they had not yet encountered? Because they understood something fundamental about the universe, Elena answered, moving to stand beside the holographic display. They understood that if civilization was going to survive, it couldn't be based on species-specific competition. It had to be based on universal principles that transcended biological differences. They created armor that symbolized that belief. Armor that could protect any warrior. Armor that was optimized not for domination, but for survival, for capability, for the possibility of coexistence. Marcus nodded slowly, clearly pleased that Elena had articulated the deeper philosophy behind the technological achievement. The precursors called themselves the first architects, Marcus said, activating another section of the historical database. They believed that their responsibility was to create frameworks that future civilizations could build upon. The armor is one such framework. It's proof of concept. It's evidence that technology can be designed with universal principles rather than species-specific domination strategies. Vex'thol felt something shifting in his cognitive architecture. His entire research thesis, which had focused on human military superiority, suddenly seemed provincial, limiting, narrow. You're suggesting that humans absorbed precursor philosophy when you encountered this armor? He asked carefully. I'm suggesting that humans recognized something in precursor thinking that aligned with our own developmental trajectory, Marcus corrected. We also came to the realization that endless military escalation was counterproductive. We also understood that comfort and capability were intertwined. We also began asking questions about why we were still treating warfare as the apex of civilization rather than a problem to be solved. Elena stepped forward, her expression carrying particular intensity. Approximately 150 years ago, my civilization experienced something called the Great Reconciliation, she said. We had achieved nuclear weapons. We had achieved advanced genetic engineering. We had achieved all the technological power necessary to completely annihilate our own species multiple times over. And we stopped. We looked at ourselves in the mirror and asked if this was really the goal. If this was really what we were trying to build. And what did you conclude? Scald, then asked, genuine curiosity evident in his vocal patterns. That comfort was more important than victory, Marcus said quietly. That capability was more valuable than conquest. That understanding was more precious than dominance. We decided to become good at survival instead of good at warfare, and the Precursor armor became evidence that this wasn't a naive position. It was the ultimate end state of military optimization. Vex'thol processed this information with his full cognitive capacity. The implications were staggering. The Coalition had spent centuries assuming that Terran military capabilities represented a threat to be managed. But what if those capabilities represented something else entirely, a different way of thinking, a different way of being? The armor, Marcus said, turning back to face the assembled observers, is the Precursor gift. It's not just a tool, it's a message. It's them saying to every future civilization, look what we achieved. Look how good we became at this thing you think is important. And then look at what we chose to do with that achievement. We chose to create beauty instead of weapons. We chose to optimize for universal benefit instead of species-specific advantage. We chose to leave, and we left this behind to show that there's another path. The observation gallery remained silent. Vex'thol could sense the cognitive disruption spreading through the assembled observers like a cascade failure through a network. One final thing, Marcus said, and his voice had become something almost ceremonial. The Precursor database contains a message. It was encoded in the armor itself, hidden in the harmonic resonance algorithms. We only discovered it after extensive analysis. We wanted to share it with you because the Coalition needs to understand this message fully. He activated a new holographic display. Text emerged. Not in Precursor language, but in a universal translation matrix that could render meaning across any species configuration. The message read, "We were the first. We do not claim to be the last. We achieved dominance, and learned it was hollow. We achieved capability, and learned it was meaningful only when shared. We achieved technology, and learned it was purposeless, without wisdom. To those who come after, do not repeat our earliest mistakes. Do not measure your worth by your weapons. Measure your worth by your choices. Build armor that protects and comforts. Build weapons that make you reluctant to use them. Build civilization that makes you proud to belong to it. This is the path we chose. This is the path we still choose, even in the spaces between spaces, in the dimensions beyond dimension. We wish you well on your own journey. Choose wisely." The message ended. In the profound silence that followed, Vex'thol felt something shift in his perception of reality itself. The Precursor armor wasn't just evidence of superior technology, it was evidence of superior wisdom. It was proof that military capability, when taken to its logical conclusion, led inevitably to philosophical questions about the value of military conflict itself. Marcus began reassembling the suit with careful, reverent movements, each piece settling into place with precision and care. "The armor has better ventilation," he said softly, speaking to no one in particular, because the Precursors understood that comfort wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. It was the foundation upon which all other capabilities were built. Every excellent warrior knows this. Every truly advanced civilization learns it eventually. He looked up at the assembled observers, and his expression carried something profound, something that transcended species boundaries and spoke directly to shared understanding. "That's what we came here to teach you," Marcus said. "Not how to be better at warfare, how to be better at living while you're preparing for warfare, how to optimize for existence instead of just optimization for conflict." The Precursors figured it out. Humans are figuring it out, and now it's your turn to decide if you want to learn it. Elena activated the chamber's primary lighting systems, and the Precursor armor gleamed with renewed luster. The suit looked simultaneously ancient and impossibly advanced. It looked like proof of concept. It looked like a promise. It looked like possibility. Vex'thol turned to face the assembled observers in the gallery, his 3 optical organs reflecting the suit's metallic sheen. "We have work to do," he announced, his voice carrying decision and determination. "We need to reanalyze everything, every military doctrine, every armor specification, every fundamental assumption about what capability means and what we should optimize for." He turned back to Marcus, and when he spoke, his words carried something that transcended translated speech. Thank you, Instructor Holloway, for showing us not just what the precursors achieved, but why they achieved it. That distinction changes everything. Marcus smiled. The smile was genuine, warm, and carried the satisfaction of a teacher who had successfully transmitted knowledge to students genuinely ready to receive it. You're welcome, Commander, he said. Now the real work begins. For your civilization, for the Coalition, for everyone who looks at that armor and asks themselves the right questions. Outside the chamber, the stars burned with ancient light, patient and eternal. Somewhere in those distant spaces, the precursors continued their journey, secure in the knowledge that the civilization they had left behind was finally, slowly, beginning to understand what they had tried to teach. The message was simple. Comfort and capability were not opposites. They were partners. And with that understanding, everything changed.